Nobody showed up to my graduation. Days later, Mom texted, "Need $2,100 for your sister's sweet 16. I sent $1 with, "Congrats." Then I changed the locks. Then cops came. It wasn't like I was surprised. Not really. Graduation day was supposed to be the moment I could finally breathe, finally feel seen, like I was more than just a paycheck, more than just the one who made everything work for everyone else. I stood there in my cap and gown, a smile plastered on my face, but the emptiness in the stadium felt like it was closing in on me. I looked out across the sea of families, each one celebrating, each one hugging their children, taking photos, applauding their accomplishments. But me? I stood alone, clutching my diploma, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. The name, Camila Lane Reed, echoed through the stadium. I couldn't even tell if anyone was cheering. I couldn't find my family in the crowd, no proud faces, no tearful eyes, not even a hint of a wave. The reserved for family row was completely empty, cold metal seats reflecting the harsh sunlight. For a second, I imagined my mother, maybe even my father, sitting there, smiling, proud. But the moment passed in the blink of an eye, leaving behind only the echo of my name and the weight of a lifetime of trying to be enough. I snapped a picture when they handed me the diploma, holding it a little too tightly. My cheeks ached from the forced smile. Around me, friends and classmates laughed and cheered, taking pictures with their families, kissing their parents, hugging each other. I just stood there, a shadow, pretending to belong to something that wasn't there. After the ceremony, I lingered in the courtyard, pretending to check my phone, hoping someone would reach out. No one did. Not a single message from my parents. I didn't even know what I expected. My mom's absence on graduation day wasn't new. It was just the latest in a long line of small, quiet betrayals. The first time they missed something important, I was a teenager, standing on the doorstep with my cap and gown, waiting for them to show up. They didn't. Mom called to say Avery had finals. Dad didn't even bother to text. I tried to shrug it off then, like I had every time before, but the weight of it never went away. I wasn't the priority. I never had been. I slid into my old beat-up Civic and watched the rest of the graduates and their families from behind the wheel. Balloons bobbed above car roofs, kids shouted, honking horns filled the air. It was supposed to be a victory, but for me it was just another reminder of how alone I really was. For a second, I imagined them walking toward me, Mom waving, Avery in her glittery sneakers, Dad holding a bouquet of flowers. But the vision vanished just as quickly as it appeared, swallowed up by the roar of engines starting and people driving away. The truth is, I shouldn't have been surprised. My whole life had been about working to earn love, trying to prove I was worth something to my family. I worked 2 jobs when I was 16, one at the crack of dawn, the other late into the night, just to keep up. All those hours spent slinging coffee at Starbucks, my mom texting me, asking for money for Avery's piano lessons or a field trip she needed to go on. "You're our pride," she'd say. I believed it for a while, until I realized it wasn't pride, it was just a different word for obligation. When I got into grad school, I thought it would change everything. I thought if I achieved enough, maybe my mom would finally see me as her equal, not just the dependable one. I didn't realize then that even my success would become another way for her to take from me. 3 days after the ceremony, when the cap and gown still hung by the door, I got a text from my mom. "Need $2,100 for your sister's sweet 16. No congratulations." No, how did it go? Just a demand the same as always. I stared at the phone screen for a long time. The numbers felt like a punch to the gut, and the truth hit me like it always did. No matter how much I gave, it would never be enough. I opened my banking app. $3,000 left in savings. I didn't even know why I had it. Every time I tried to save, something came up. Avery needed this, or Mom needed that. For years, I had been the one who made sure everything worked. Even if it meant putting myself last, this time I couldn't do it anymore. Something inside me, small and quiet, stood up. I typed in $1 and added a note, "Congrats." Then I hit send. For a moment, I just stared at the screen. The word "sent" blinked back at me. The truth settled in. I wasn't just sending money, I was sending a message. That was the moment I decided I wasn't going to be the one who always gave, who always sacrificed. I walked over to the drawer by the front door, pulled out the spare key Mom insisted I keep for emergencies, and dropped it in the trash. I called a locksmith, told him I needed new locks. When he came an hour later, he worked quietly, his tools making soft, rhythmic sounds, and when he left, the click of the new lock was a final sound. My apartment was mine. No one could just walk in anymore. No one could demand anything from me. It was the first boundary I'd ever built, and the first real silence I'd ever felt. The kind that wasn't uncomfortable but freeing. The kind that told me, finally, I could breathe. I didn't realize how much peace it would bring until the knocking started. The silence in my apartment felt different now. Peaceful, almost. The kind that settles into your bones. The kind that makes you want to curl up with a good book or make coffee without someone knocking on your door or asking for something. For the first time in years, I could just breathe. I walked around the apartment, looking at the things that used to feel like anchors. The framed photos on the walls, the stack of books by the window, the coffee table where I used to sit and wait for my mom to call or to ask about my sister's latest school project. Now everything felt mine. No one else's. There was no urgency to answer anyone's calls or texts, no need to make excuses for why I was never enough. For a moment, I let myself imagine what it would feel like if my family could see me this way, strong, independent, at peace. But I knew better. They'd never get it. To them, I was always just the one who took care of things, the one who kept everything together, even if it meant falling apart in the process. The knock on the door came the next morning, almost too quiet at first, like a whisper in the hallway. It didn't register immediately. My mind was still wrapped up in the quiet of the apartment, in the stillness of it all. I didn't move at first, not even when the knock came again, louder this time. 3 sharp raps, like the world was reminding me that it wasn't over. I stood up slowly, my heart skipping a beat as I walked toward the door. It wasn't Mrs. Patel, my landlord. She always called first. It was too early for anyone else to be stopping by. And then, as I peered through the peephole, I saw them, 2 officers standing in the hallway, their badges gleaming in the dim light of the morning. I froze. My first thought was that something had happened to my mom or Avery. But no, they weren't here for that. The officer at the door, he was taller than the other, wearing a dark suit, his voice calm, spoke first. "Miss Reed?" he asked, his voice low and professional. I nodded, unsure of what to say, but my legs felt like they might give out beneath me. "We received a call from your mother. She said you've been acting erratically, changing locks, not answering calls, and that she's worried you might harm yourself. We just need to confirm you're okay." I didn't laugh, even though it almost felt like I should. She'd done it. My mom had called the police on me, not to check if I was safe, not to see if I needed anything. She'd used them to do what she couldn't, keep me under control, make me feel like I was the one in the wrong. I wasn't sure if I should be angry or just numb. The words slipped out before I could stop them. "I'm fine," I said. "I just needed some space." The taller officer's expression softened, but only just. He stepped into the apartment without waiting for me to invite him in. He looked around, as if expecting to find something out of place, something that might prove my mother's concern. But everything was quiet, too quiet even for me. No messy piles of laundry or half-empty takeout containers, just silence. My coffee mug sat on the table, the steam still rising from it like a faint reminder of the calm I'd finally found. "Do you mind if we take a look around?" he asked. I nodded, my voice tight. "Go ahead." They didn't need to look long. I stood there, arms crossed, watching as the officers slowly inspected my apartment. The walls were decorated with memories, some of which felt like they belonged to someone else. I had put them up, sure, but they felt distant now. The photos of me and Avery as kids, before everything got complicated, before I learned what it meant to always give and never get anything in return. The officers didn't find anything that suggested I was a danger to myself. There were no signs of instability, no indication of distress. I was fine. I wasn't the one with the problem, but they had to do their job, so they asked the usual questions about work, family, stress. I answered them all honestly, too honestly, maybe, but I couldn't help it. They didn't know what it felt like to be the one who always held it all together, to watch your family treat you like a bank account with legs. "You're doing okay," the officer asked as they prepared to leave. "Everything seems fine here, but we'll file the report as no concern. If your mom calls again, you can reference this visit." I didn't respond at first. My mind was still reeling. My mother had crossed a line, and I wasn't sure how to react. I wasn't even sure if I should feel guilty for what I'd done. I had set a boundary, finally, but it felt like the world was crashing in on me for it. The officer's voice broke through my thoughts as he turned to leave. "Sometimes when people start standing up for themselves, others panic," he said. "Happens more than you'd think." When the door closed behind them, I stood there shaking. Not from fear, but from a quiet rage I couldn't fully name yet. My mom hadn't just crossed a line, she'd declared war on it. I didn't know what I was going to do next. I didn't know if I should feel proud of myself, or if I should have just let it go. But what I did know, what I understood deep down, was that things were never going back to the way they were. Not anymore. And that scared me more than I was willing to admit. I sat back down on the couch, staring at the empty space where my family should have been, where I had always hoped they would be. The silence was different now. Not peaceful. Not anymore. It felt like the pause before the storm, and I was done waiting to get struck. The knocking started the next morning, a sharp, rhythmic sound that echoed through the apartment. It was too early for anyone to be here. At least, that's what I thought as I sat up in bed, the covers tangled around my legs, my mind still half in the fog of sleep. The silence I had cherished just hours before now felt like a warning, and for a second, I almost didn't want to get up. I didn't want to open that door, didn't want to face whatever might be on the other side, but the knocking came again, this time louder, more insistent. My heart started to race. I couldn't just ignore it. Not when I knew who it was. It had to be my mom, or maybe Avery. Either way, I knew it was coming. It was only a matter of time before they would show up, demanding their usual, expecting their usual. I threw the covers off and stood, the cold floor making me flinch as my bare feet hit the wood. My legs felt heavy as I walked to the door, each step a reminder that this was my life now, no more pretending, no more hiding behind a smile. No more pretending to be the daughter who didn't mind being used. No more feeling like I had to apologize for setting boundaries. When I looked through the peephole, I saw them, 2 police officers standing in the hallway. My heart skipped a beat. What the hell were the cops doing here? Why were they here for me? I opened the door cautiously, trying to steady the breath that had gotten stuck in my chest. The taller officer gave me a polite, measured look. The kind of face that seemed to say, "I'm just doing my job." The other one, shorter, had a more sympathetic expression. I couldn't decide which one was worse. "Miss Reed?" the tall officer asked, his voice even, professional. I nodded, still unsure of what was happening, but the pit in my stomach was starting to grow. "Yes. We received a call from your mother," the officer continued. "She expressed concern for your well-being. Said you'd been acting erratically, changing locks, not answering calls, and that she was worried you might harm yourself." He paused, his gaze flicking over my shoulder as if he expected to find something out of place. "We just need to confirm that you're okay." My mind went blank. My mom had called the police on me. She'd called the cops, painted me as unstable, trying to control the narrative, trying to make me the one who was in the wrong. I stood there frozen for a second, and then the anger hit. I wanted to laugh, but the laughter wouldn't come. It felt more like a punch to the gut. I took a deep breath and forced myself to speak, to sound calm. "I'm fine," I said, my voice flat. "I just needed some space." The officers exchanged a quick glance, as if they were weighing whether to believe me. The taller one didn't say anything for a moment, but the shorter officer nodded, stepping slightly closer. "Do you mind if we take a look around?" he asked, his tone polite but firm. I stepped aside, allowing them into the apartment, feeling like I was in some kind of surreal dream. I wasn't used to this, used to being the one to clean up after everyone else, not the one being investigated like I was the criminal. As they moved through the apartment, I watched them carefully. The officer's eyes scanned the small space, noting the coffee mug on the table, the empty chair beside the window, the framed photos that lined the walls. They didn't find anything unusual, of course. There was nothing here that would suggest I was unstable, nothing that screamed I was in trouble. Everything was exactly as it should be. The silence that had once felt so comforting now seemed suffocating. Every creak of the floorboard, every click of the officers' pens on their notepads felt like it was magnified, reminding me that I was being judged, watched, as if I wasn't the one in control of my own life. The officers didn't speak much after that. They asked a few questions: if I was employed, if I had any medical conditions, if I had a history of stress or family issues. I answered as truthfully as I could, but I knew deep down they were just filling out forms, checking boxes. They weren't really concerned about me. They were just following orders. After what felt like an eternity, the taller officer gave me a brief nod. "Everything seems fine here. We'll file the report as no concern. But if your mother calls again, you can reference this visit." He turned to leave, and just before stepping out the door, the shorter officer looked back at me with a soft smile. Sometimes when people start standing up for themselves, others panic. Happens more than you'd think. The door clicked shut behind them, and for a moment I stood there, unable to move. My chest tightened, the weight of what had just happened crashing down on me. My mother had crossed a line, and she'd done it with the help of the police. She'd turned my own independence against me, trying to make me seem crazy, trying to erase the boundaries I was finally starting to build for myself. I sank down onto the couch, staring at the door, my heart still pounding in my chest. The silence around me wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt like the calm before a storm. I'd done something that day, something I'd never done before. I'd built a wall between me and my family, and now they were going to tear it down. They wouldn't stop. They couldn't, not until I was back where they wanted me, submissive, obedient, always giving. But I wasn't going to let that happen, not anymore. I was done letting them use me. I was done pretending. And even though the fear and anger were still there, I felt something else, too, something that felt like relief. Maybe, just maybe, I was finally starting to take control of my life. The following morning, I could barely bring myself to check my phone. The officer's words were still echoing in my head. Sometimes when people start standing up for themselves, others panic. I wasn't sure if that was supposed to make me feel better or worse. I hadn't done anything wrong. I had simply stopped letting my family walk all over me, but the knock on the door calling the police on me, like I was the one who needed saving, stung deeper than I had expected. The silence in my apartment felt thicker than before. I couldn't even sit down to enjoy the coffee I brewed. The weight of my mother's call, of the false story she'd told the police, sat like a stone in my stomach. I felt trapped in the silence, like there was nowhere to hide from the reality of what was happening. She had taken it too far this time. I tried to ignore the buzzing anxiety in my chest as I opened my banking app, hoping that losing myself in something simple might help. But as soon as the app loaded, my stomach twisted. There were 2 new credit inquiries listed, both for credit cards I hadn't applied for. The names of the companies were unfamiliar, but something about them felt too familiar. I clicked on one and my heart dropped when I saw the details. A new Capital One credit card had been opened in my name, and another one for Discover. Both accounts had my name, my address, but there was a glaring detail: neither account was linked to my current address. They were both linked to my parents' house in Littleton. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours. No, this couldn't be happening. My mind raced as I clicked through to the transaction history. It was all there: purchases, a shopping spree. The balances were climbing, and there were charges at stores I didn't recognize. Then my breath caught when I saw it: Cherry Creek Events, Denver DJ Agency, Glam Studio. My mother had used my name to open these accounts. She had used my identity to buy things for my sister's sweet 16 party. That's what it had been for. All of it. The money, the family, favors, the manipulation. I felt numb. The world around me didn't make sense anymore. For years I had been the one who showed up, who gave, who sacrificed, who worked overtime and made sure everyone had what they needed. But now I realized it was all a lie. They had never needed me in the way I had thought. They had only needed me to keep giving. And I had allowed it. I had let them turn me into this endless well of resources, giving and giving, while they took and took. The anger began to rise in me like a flood. I grabbed my phone and called the number on the Capital One statement. My voice shook when I spoke, but I was determined. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. Not anymore. "This is Camila Reed," I said, trying to steady my voice. "I need to report identity theft." The woman on the other end of the line was polite but cautious. She asked for my personal information, confirming that the account had been opened in my name at my parents' address. She told me that it had been done in person last month. "Ma'am," she continued, her voice careful now, "this account was opened in person at our Littleton branch. The co-applicant listed is Linda M. Reed." I froze. My mother had not only stolen from me, she had become me. She had used my identity to open the account. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I felt dizzy, like the room was spinning around me. I couldn't process it all at once. My chest was tight, and the room suddenly felt too small. I closed my eyes, trying to gather my thoughts. This wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't just bad luck. This was my mother taking everything she could from me, and I had been so blind, so desperate to make things work that I never saw it until now. "Mom, we'll flag this for fraud investigation," the woman said, pulling me back from my thoughts. "You'll receive forms to complete within 24 hours. I ended the call and sat there, staring at the screen of my phone. The weight of it all felt suffocating. This wasn't just about money anymore. This wasn't just about being asked to pay for my sister's sweet 16 party. This was about my mother stealing my future, using my name, using my life, all while pretending to care about me. The tears didn't come. The numbness settled in deeper, leaving behind a cold emptiness. I had been so caught up in trying to please them, in trying to be the perfect daughter, the perfect sibling, that I hadn't even seen the manipulation. I thought I had been enough. I thought I could earn their love. But no matter how much I gave, it was never enough. It would never be enough. The phone in my hand felt heavy, like it was something I couldn't hold on to anymore, something I had to let go. I opened my voice recorder. In Colorado, one-party consent meant I could legally record my next conversation with my mother. I dialed her number. The phone rang 3 times before she picked up, and her voice was sharp, like she already knew I was about to confront her. "So, you're alive," she said. Her voice was always like that, sharply dismissive, like she could never be bothered to ask how I was, but was always quick to judge. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I found 2 credit cards under my name, both using your address. Do you want to explain that?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes. Then she laughed. It was hollow and practiced, a sound I knew too well. "Oh, that, honey, I did it for you. You need credit history. I was helping," she said, her voice light and dismissive. "You should be grateful by paying for Avery's sweet 16. I clenched my fists. I wasn't gonna let her talk to me like that anymore. "Helping," I said, my voice soft but firm. "You forged my signature." She waved it off as if it didn't matter. "Don't make this dramatic. It's family. You've always been so ungrateful. Do you think the world doesn't know who paid for your education?" I laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "You mean me? I paid for it with every check, every double shift, every loan you told me to take while you used my college fund for Avery's prom dress." Avery groaned in the background, clearly tired of hearing the same story again. But this time, it wasn't just about the money. It was about something bigger than that. I turned to my mother. "That silver dress you wore for her party, You danced in it on a card opened in my name. Enjoy the spotlight." Her silence was thick, but it was the kind of silence that meant she was caught. There was nowhere to run anymore. The truth had come out, and she could no longer pretend. "You agreed," she said, trying to shift the blame. "Mom," I said, my voice calm but unwavering. "You called the police on me because I changed my locks. You tried to paint me unstable so you could keep control. That ends today." She didn't speak for a long time, and when she did, it was barely a whisper. "You wouldn't dare." I leaned in, the words sharp on my tongue. "I already did." I ended the call before she could say anything more. The weight of it all hung in the air, heavy, suffocating. But for the first time, I felt something else, a strange sense of peace. I had done it. I had finally stood up for myself. And no matter what came next, I knew I was never going back. The next few days passed in a blur. I barely slept, my mind racing through every detail of what had happened. The conversation with my mother, the police visit, the discovery of the credit cards, it was all too much to take in at once. I had spent so long fighting to be enough, fighting to be loved by people who didn't even see me as a person. Now, everything was laid bare. The truth was so much worse than I could have imagined. She hadn't just taken money from me. She had stolen my identity, my future. And the worst part was, I hadn't even seen it coming. I tried to focus on work, tried to keep my mind busy, but every time I sat down at my desk or glanced at my phone, the images of those credit card statements haunted me. I thought I had been doing everything right, working hard, getting my degree, building my life, but it had never been enough. It would never be enough. "Thea, you have to keep going." I told myself, "You're strong, you can do this." But each day felt heavier than the last. I was angry, furious even. And yet, there was a part of me that was still scared. Scared of the consequences of standing up for myself, of finally setting boundaries. What would happen to my family? What would happen to me? Then the call came. It was a Thursday afternoon, and the sun was setting behind the city skyline, casting long shadows through my apartment. I was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through job listings, when my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I should pick up, but then I thought of the fraud of my mother and how she always managed to twist things around. I pressed the green button and brought the phone to my ear. "Miss Reed?" A woman's voice asked, crisp and formal. "Yes," I answered, trying to steady my breathing. I didn't know what to expect, but I wasn't prepared for what came next. "This is Lauren Stein, legal representative for Capital One in Colorado. I'm calling to inform you that the bank has escalated your fraud report. Our internal team has coordinated with local law enforcement to verify the transactions made using your name at Cherry Creek events. You're not required to attend, but we wanted to notify you." I felt my heart drop into my stomach. "You're sending the police?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Yes, ma'am. It's standard procedure," she replied, her tone even, but I could hear the weight of the situation in her words. "We'll document and confirm the charges." I didn't know what to say. My brain was spinning. Police. This was real. It wasn't just a family argument anymore. This was legal. This was serious. "Thank you for the update," I said, my voice shaking, though I was trying my best to sound calm. "I appreciate it." I hung up without saying anything more. I felt numb. The gravity of the situation hit me all at once. The fraud, the police, the investigation, it was no longer just about the money. This was about accountability. About standing up for myself, even if it meant the entire world knew what my family had done. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of the phone still in my hand. Outside, the sun had dipped below the horizon, and the city's lights were beginning to flicker on, casting a soft glow across the buildings. Everything seemed so far away, like I was watching the world through a window, detached from it all. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel like I was finally getting the justice I deserved. I just felt tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of the anger that kept rising in my chest. The anger that had been there for so long, but had only recently started to surface. I looked around the apartment, at the things I had worked so hard for. My diploma was still framed on the wall, next to the new lock I had installed. The reminder of my independence. But even now, in this moment of supposed victory, I felt like I was still tied to my family. Tied to them by the shame, by the guilt, by the years of neglect and manipulation. The phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. I picked it up without hesitation this time. Miss Reed. The voice on the other end was familiar but colder now. Yes, this is Avery, she said. You're insane. The police just showed up. The DJ stopped. Everyone's staring. Mom's freaking out. They're saying your name. The bank guy said your name. What did you do? I closed my eyes. The anger rising again. It was like my sister still couldn't understand that this was about more than her sweet 16 party. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The truth was out. There was nothing more to say. I hung up the phone and stared at it for a long time, the words from Avery still ringing in my ears. My mother had taken everything from me, my time, my money, my dignity, and now she was still trying to make me feel guilty. She was still trying to play the victim. It didn't matter that she had stolen from me. She would always find a way to twist it into her favor. I wasn't going to let it happen anymore. The phone buzzed again, this time a message from Avery Afaf. What did you do? I didn't reply. I didn't have to. The truth was already out there. The police were already at the party, and I had already taken the first step to taking back control. I walked over to the window and looked out over the city, the lights flickering in the distance. There was no more pretending. No more hoping for something that wasn't coming. For the first time in my life, I was going to stand my ground. And I wasn't going to feel guilty about it anymore. Not anymore. The day of Avery's Sweet 16 arrived like a storm on the horizon. The city was sweltering under an unrelenting sun, the air thick with heat and tension. I hadn't planned to go, of course. There was no way I could show up after everything that had happened. But still, I found myself thinking about it, about how easy it would have been to slip back into the role they'd always wanted me to play. The dependable daughter, the one who always forgave, always gave no matter what. But I was done with that. I wasn't going back. I sat by the window in my apartment, the cool air from the fan brushing against my skin, watching the sky darken as the evening approached. I thought about my sister, about how she probably didn't even know what was really going on. Avery had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. I didn't know if she understood what was happening or if she was just caught in the same web my mother had spun for years. A knock on the door jolted me from my thoughts. It wasn't a loud knock, just a soft tap, but my heart skipped anyway. I wasn't expecting anyone. The last few days had been quiet, save for the occasional call from work or messages from friends who hadn't heard the news yet. I didn't want to face anyone, but I knew I couldn't hide forever. I stood and opened the door slowly, just enough to see who was standing outside. I wasn't surprised when I saw the officer, his badge catching the light as he looked down at me with that same neutral expression. He wasn't here for a friendly chat, I knew that much. Miss Reed? He asked, his voice calm, as if this was just another routine visit. I nodded, my throat tight. Yes. We need to speak with you about the ongoing investigation involving your name and some recent transactions. His words were careful, measured. He didn't need to say much for me to understand what he meant. The situation was escalating, and there was no turning back. I stepped aside to let him in, my heart pounding as he entered the apartment. The silence in the room felt suffocating, almost too loud. My apartment hadn't changed, but it felt like everything was different now, like the walls were closing in. I stood there, watching as the officer looked around, his eyes scanning every corner, every surface. He was here for a reason. The officer took out a folder and flipped it open. We've confirmed fraudulent charges linked to your name, he continued, his voice still impassive. Our team has been working with the bank to verify these transactions, and we need to document everything. I didn't say anything at first. What could I say? The truth was out there. My mother had used my name to rack up thousands of dollars in charges, all under the guise of helping me build credit. I was furious, but I couldn't let him see that. I had to keep it together, keep calm. He asked a few more questions about my relationship with my family, about the details of the credit cards and the charges. I answered as briefly as I could, not wanting to give him any more information than necessary. The officer's tone remained professional, but I could tell he was trying to gauge my reaction. Finally, he stood up, slipping the folder back into his bag. "We'll need to contact you again once we've completed our investigation," he said, his tone softening slightly. "But for now, this visit is mostly to inform you of the situation." I nodded, my throat tight. "Thank you," I said, even though the words felt hollow. The officer turned to leave, but before he stepped out the door, he glanced at me one last time. "I know this is hard," he said, his voice gentler now. "But sometimes, when people start standing up for themselves, it shakes up the people around them. It's not unusual for them to act out of fear or desperation." I didn't respond. I just nodded again and shut the door behind him. The room felt smaller now. It was no longer just my apartment. It was the stage for the consequences of everything that had been building up for years. My mother's manipulation, her control, it had finally caught up with her, and with me. I sank down onto the couch, my hands shaking. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know how far this would go, but I knew one thing for sure: I couldn't go back to the way things were. I couldn't let her keep using me, keep making me feel like I was nothing more than a tool for her to use. I was done with that life. The phone buzzed on the coffee table, pulling me out of my thoughts. I picked it up, dreading who it might be. When I saw the message from Avery, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "Are you insane? The police just showed up, the DJ stopped, everyone's staring, Mom's freaking out. They're saying your name. The bank guy said your name. What did you do?" But I didn't reply right away. I wasn't sure what to say. The truth had already been exposed. The police were there, my mother's lies were being unraveled, and the whole world could see what she had done. But Avery, she had no idea. She still saw my mom as the one who could do no wrong. I let the message sit for a moment before I finally typed back, "It's done. She made her choice. I'm not the one who's insane." Faye, I stared at the message for a moment, my thumb hovering over the screen. Then I deleted it. It didn't matter. Nothing Avery said would change what had already happened. The police were at the party now, and my mother's fast aid had cracked. The storm had finally hit. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. It was strange how peaceful it looked from up here. The chaos of the world seemed distant, far away, and for the first time in a long time I felt something else. Not relief, not joy, but something close to it. A sense of calm, a sense of strength. I had done the hard part. Now it was time to let the rest of it fall into place. The days after the party felt like they moved in slow motion. The world around me seemed to be moving forward, but I was stuck, unable to shake the image of my mother standing there, caught in her own web of lies, her face drained of color as the police arrived. My heart still raced when I thought about it, the sound of the officer's voice announcing the investigation, the quiet shock in her eyes. It was a moment I had never expected to witness. My mother, the one who had always been in control, finally exposed for what she really was. The silence in my apartment had become heavier, more suffocating. Every time my phone buzzed, I hesitated before answering, wondering if it would be another call from the bank, from the police, from anyone else involved in the mess she'd created. I had hoped that once the truth came out, I would feel a sense of release, but instead I felt an eerie emptiness. What came next? What happened after you exposed the truth and destroyed everything you knew? I didn't hear from her for a few days after the police were called. Part of me had expected her to reach out, to beg me to understand, to apologize for everything. But she didn't. Instead, I got a message from Avery, asking if I was okay. I didn't know how to respond. How could I explain to her that the woman she adored had been living a lie? How could I tell her that the reason I had never been enough wasn't because I didn't try hard enough, but because I had been used? I thought about calling my father, but I didn't. He had always been the quiet one in the background, the one who went along with whatever Mom said. I couldn't even imagine what he was thinking right now, but I knew I wasn't ready to face him. Not yet. Then, just when I thought I couldn't take the waiting anymore, the email came from Capital One. I had expected it, but seeing it there in my inbox was like a punch to the gut all over again. The fraud investigation was resolved. It had only taken a few days, but it felt like a lifetime. The bank confirmed what I already knew. My mother had forged my name, opened credit cards in my name, and used them without my knowledge or consent. The email was brief, to the point. Primary applicant Linda M. Reed has acknowledged unauthorized use and agreed to repay $8 for $12 in full. The numbers didn't mean anything. They were just numbers. What struck me was the lack of any remorse, any acknowledgement of what had really happened. My mother hadn't just taken my money, she had taken my identity. And now it was over, but I didn't feel any satisfaction, just emptiness. I sat there, staring at the email, and for the first time, I realized how long I had been living in a state of denial. How long I had allowed myself to believe that things could somehow get better. I had waited for my mother to love me in a way that was real, but it was never going to happen. She had used me for too long, and I had let her. The apartment was quiet again, but the silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was oppressive. I could feel the weight of everything that had happened, everything I had uncovered. My chest was tight with a mix of anger and disbelief. How had I let it get this far? I wanted to leave. I wanted to run away from all of it, to find some way to escape the reality of what my family had become. But I couldn't. This was my life now. This was the price I had to pay for standing up for myself, for finally building a boundary. As I sat there, staring at the email, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from my mother. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. What could she possibly say? What excuse could she give for everything she had done? I opened the message slowly, my eyes scanning the words. Camila, we need to talk. This has gone too far. You don't understand what you've done. You've destroyed this family. I felt a cold laugh rise in my throat. She was still playing the victim. After everything, after using my name to get credit cards, after calling the police on me, she still had the audacity to say that Severus had destroyed the family. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. She had crossed every line I had ever tried to draw, and I wasn't going to let her rewrite the narrative anymore. She could blame me all she wanted, but I knew the truth. I had finally done what she never thought I would, stood up for myself. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of the phone in my hand heavy. This wasn't over, I knew that. There would be more to come, more of my family's mess to clean up, more of their attempts to make me feel guilty for their actions, but I wasn't going to let them. Not anymore. The world outside my window was starting to turn dark. The sky was filled with the last traces of daylight, and the city hummed with the energy of a night that was just beginning. I could hear the distant sound of sirens, the city never truly quiet, even at this hour. But for the first time, I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that came from silence. It was the kind of peace that came from knowing that I was done pretending, done trying to fix things that couldn't be fixed, done making myself small for people who would never see me for who I really was. I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the city below. The lights shimmered in the distance. And for a moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. It was a quiet kind of freedom, the kind that doesn't make noise or demands, the kind that lets you breathe again. I wasn't going to fix my family, but I was going to fix myself, and that was enough. 6 months later, I stood in front of my new desk, the soft hum of the office around me. The view of the city was different now, less intimidating. It was still the same skyline, the same streets, but everything felt smaller, more manageable. I'd traded in my old routine, the late night shifts, the silent apartment for weeks at a time, for something that felt like it was finally mine. It wasn't just the job. It was the space I'd carved out for myself. The office was bright, with windows that let in the morning light. My computer screen was filled with data, my new project waiting for me to dive in. For once, there wasn't a weight on my shoulders. The chaos of my past was far behind, locked away in a corner of my mind where I didn't need to revisit it every day. The door behind me opened, and I turned to see Sarah, one of my new coworkers, standing there with a cup of coffee in her hand. "How's the first week going?" she asked, her voice warm and welcoming. I smiled, grateful for her kindness. "Good, really good. It's refreshing, to not feel like I'm drowning in other people's messes." She nodded, her eyes understanding. "I get it. I've been there. But you're doing great. You're a natural at this." I shrugged, trying to downplay the compliment, but the truth was, for the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged. Not just in my job, but in my life. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. The past few months had been a whirlwind. After the fraud investigation was resolved, things hadn't immediately settled. There were conversations, apologies, and more than a few arguments with my family. My mother never apologized, not really, but I saw a shift in her. I could tell she knew I wasn't the same person anymore. I wasn't gonna let her control me. She sent me a few texts after the police visit, trying to pull me back in, but I didn't respond. Not because I didn't care, but because I realized that I had to stop letting her dictate my choices. Avery, too, reached out. At first, it was just casual messages: "How's your new job? Are you doing okay?" But then it became something else, something deeper. We started talking more, really talking, about the things we never had the chance to before, about how we both felt growing up, how I had always been the one holding everything together while she was the one who got the attention. I didn't hold it against her anymore. She was just a product of the same system, a system that had broken both of us in different ways. Slowly, we began to rebuild our relationship, not as sisters caught in a power struggle, but as two people trying to make sense of everything that had happened. My father, on the other hand, was a different story. He tried to reach out once, but the conversation felt empty, like he was just saying what he thought he should say. There was no apology, no real effort to make things right. I realized that maybe some relationships weren't meant to be fixed, and that was okay. It wasn't that I didn't care. It was just that I had to let go. I had to stop giving parts of myself to people who would never see me as more than a resource. I had to stop trying to fix a broken family when the only person who needed fixing was me. By the time the fall rolled around, the air in Denver had started to cool, the leaves on the trees turning gold and orange. I was walking home from work one evening, the crisp autumn air biting at my skin, when I stopped in front of a small coffee shop I'd passed 1,000 times but never entered. Something about it felt different today. The smell of freshly brewed coffee wafted out the door, and I stepped inside, letting the warmth wrap around me like a blanket. The barista behind the counter smiled at me. "What can I get you?" she asked. I glanced at the menu, but my eyes kept drifting to the window, to the street outside, where the city seemed to pulse with a life of its own. For the first time in so long, I felt like I was in control of my own story. "I'll have a large coffee, black," I said, giving her a smile in return. She rang me up, and as I waited, I took a deep breath. The sounds of the coffee shop, the chatter of people around me, the clinking of mugs, it all felt so normal, so simple. And for once, that simplicity felt like peace. I wasn't tangled in a web of lies or manipulation. I wasn't trying to make things work with people who only saw me as an obligation. When she handed me the coffee, I thanked her and stepped back out into the street. The air was cool now, but the warmth from the cup in my hand felt like the first real comfort I'd had in years. I had worked so hard to get here, to this place where I wasn't just surviving, but living. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. The world seemed wide open, full of possibilities, and I was no longer bound by the past. As I walked down the sidewalk, the sound of leaves crunching beneath my feet, I realized something. I had spent so many years trying to be enough for my family, trying to make them see me, but I was already enough. I had always been enough, and that was the most freeing thing of all. If you've ever had to set a boundary just to breathe again, you're not alone. We all have our moments when we need to change the locks. And when we do, It's the first step in reclaiming our lives, the first step toward freedom.